So obviously, we know that in the wake of some accusations that first a dozen and now less than a dozen UNRWA members, UNRWA, which is the Palestinian Refugee Relief Fund for the UN, is now being defunded. And so let's take a look at the State Department, who was asked about this by some journalists. The timing of this announcement to defund UNRWA came hours, not days, hours after the ICJ released their preliminary ruling, which said that there was evidence of genocide on the part of Israel. And so, as a way to steal some headlines and defund relief for Palestinian refugees, Western countries were very quick to defund this agency. So let's hear a little bit from the press room.
Thanks, Matt. Can you shed a little light on the timeline around the UNRWA decision? The Israeli government has since shared that intelligence dossier with some members of the press. They said they shared the dossier, I believe, on that Friday.
On Friday, that's correct.
The decision was also announced that Friday, the same day the court ruling came out. How was state able to, how were you able to make such a fast decision?
It's a good question. So I think there has been some confusion about this. This matter was not first brought to us by the government of Israel. It was brought to us by UNRWA itself. UNRWA brought this matter to the government of the United States, the State Department, on Wednesday of last week, and said that they were aware of allegations by the government of Israel, and they had conducted their own initial assessment and found those allegations to be credible, and were taking disciplinary action against a number of people. So they contacted us on Wednesday. We spent Thursday looking into the matter. We contacted the government of Israel on Thursday, engaged in initial consultations with them. We're continuing to talk with the United Nations. The Secretary spoke to the Secretary General on Thursday. And then on Friday, we announced that decision and were briefed by Israel. But I should make very clear, our decision to temporarily pause funding was not just based on the strength of Israeli evidence, but it was based on UNRWA's own conclusion that those allegations were credible.
Was there any-
Okay, wow. I just got a couple things to say about this. Okay, so he's saying UNRWA came to us and said, we are aware of Israeli accusations that a dozen, now half a dozen of our members participated in October 7th. Why do you think they came to you? They came to you and said that we are aware of these accusations and we are taking disciplinary actions in the hopes that you would not defund them. Like, if it's true, and like I said, I don't take any of these people say at face value, but if it's true that UNRWA reached out to you and said, hey, we know there's an accusation out there, we want you to know we are taking action in accordance with that accusation, they did that in order to prevent you from defunding them, obviously. Right? They wanted to let you know, hey, we're taking care of it. We're not ignoring it the way you do with all of Israel's crimes.
Hey,
Number
guys,
two,
we just want you to know we want you to defund us.
yeah, hey, guys, I just wanted to let you know a couple of our guys have been implicated in October 7th, and so we would really like you to take away all our funding and starve 2 million Palestinians. Yeah. Just absolutely insane. Number one. Number two, look at how condensed this timeline is when Israel needs a favor. When it comes time to defund Palestinian refugee aid, less than 48 hours between when they get word of the accusation and when they decide to pause funding. Not even 2 days, from Wednesday to Friday. Wednesday to Friday. We've seen it. We've shown a lot of these briefings on this show because this is very, very revealing. Journalist in Lebanon killed by the IDF in October. We just did a segment on this last week. Still no answer as to what Israel had to say for that. When it comes time to actually holding Israel responsible for crime after crime after crime, the timeline is like this. When it comes time to defund UNRWA, boom, 2 days. 2 days.
Well,
just unbelievable.
They put their best people on genocide.
Yeah, just absolutely incredible.
Concern internally that releasing the announcement within about an hour or so of the ICJ court ruling, which one thing it did was, instruct Israel to make sure that humanitarian aid was flowing, that announcing it so close together would seem like a repudiation in some ways.
No, there was no concern, but also the United Nations had made its announcement, and we thought it was important that given that the United Nations had made that announcement, and that's not timing we control. They made that announcement Friday morning. We thought that it was important that we respond as quickly as possible to make clear the position of the United States. It was in no way, in our mind, related to the ICJ decision.
I mean, that seems like a pretty big coincidence to me. But assuming it wasn't, it's still reflective of the just rank and horrible bias that you would take such swift action to defund an organization of 13,000 employees because of the alleged crimes of a literal handful of them at the expense of millions of displaced people. You would move so quickly to take that kind of action, yet you drag your feet on incident after incident after incident when it comes to investigating Israel's violation of international law.
Yeah, let me just point out, because we've gotten this in the comments section about the number of employees at UNRWA. Okay, so this happens sometimes in the media. You get a virus of information and nobody really knows what the truth is. Some news agencies report that they have 13,000 people working for UNRWA. Some of them report 30,000. I promise you, this started with somebody misheard something and misreported something, and it just spread out.
Well, as I understand,
I am going to tend to trust Professor Finkelstein, who went with the 13,000 number.
Well, I think, as I understand, there's like 13,000 in Gaza, and then there's more who work outside of Gaza. That's what I understand that to be. That's where I remember reading that.
Norm went with 13,000, but
yeah, in the
I've
actual
seen
territory itself.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've seen both, but you might be right. So that might be where that division comes from. But we've had people in the comments section correct it. But there are these two numbers out there. But it's something that the Times pointed out in its coverage of this. They quoted members of other agencies saying, hey, this is not the first time there has been like people within relief organizations accused of serious crimes. And they've never been defunded before. Right. Like they never felt because one or two people are guilty of crimes that an entire agency needs to be defunded. So why this? And this is
especially when defunding it has such outsized humanitarian implications.
Of course. I got to say, both as a person of Jewish descent and as an American, I don't think I've ever really delved so much into how much of the hatred of both Jews, who are unfortunately and through much effort by Zionists, thought of as being Zionist by definition, and hatred of America is really driven by Israel. It really is. The more you look into this, the more you see what the rest of the world sees, the more you realize, like, would the Arab nations really give a shit about what we do if it were not for our involvement with Israel? Like they care what we do in America. Right. Just leave them the fuck alone. And when you look at what a criminal regime this is that we support, of course they hate us. You don't need to wring your hand. Oh, why do they feel it? Look at this. Look at this. And this has been going on for 75 years. Of course they hate us.
It's the most obvious thing in the world. Here's a write-up. UNRWA funding pauses come amid uncertainty over Gaza aid future. So this was published midnight February 1st. So this is a couple days old. The United States and its allies are suspending funding to a UN agency at a critical moment for Gaza. Before the war, roughly 80% of the population of the Strip was reliant on international aid. Following months of conflict, the needs are only more dire, with almost 9 out of 10 people displaced and at least half of the buildings in the Strip damaged or destroyed. The UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, played a vital role in distributing international aid to Gaza during the war. But after Israel alleged that more than a dozen UNRWA staff members were involved in the Hamas-led attacks on Israeli towns on October 7th, the United States, at least 9 other donor countries, now that list is over a dozen, have paused their funding pending further investigation. And thank you, John, in Minnesota. Apparently you checked this. This is what I had been under the impression. 13,000 in Gaza, 30,000 total.
Thank you.
Critics of the move say it will only add to the humanitarian disaster in Gaza, with UN officials warning that the impact would be felt within weeks. Speaking to the Security Council on Wednesday, UN humanitarian aid chief Martin Griffiths said efforts in Gaza were completely dependent on UNRWA being adequately funded and operational, and called for funding to be immediately resumed. The dispute about UNRWA funding comes amid a growing debate about who should pay for Gaza as the cost of the conflict soars. In a report released Wednesday, UN experts on economic development wrote that there is, quote, no doubt that returning Gaza to its pre-war state would require, quote, several tens of billions of dollars by any conservative estimation. Current pledges from donor states would be many times below that. The Biden administration has pinned its hopes on Arab states to help rebuild Gaza, with the condition that Israel agrees to recognize a Palestinian state. So once again, a little bit of a side note here, they are very, very determined to get more money for weapons to Ukraine in what is clearly a lost war. But they want other countries to pick up the bill for the territory that they helped annihilate. But during a joint news conference with his Saudi counterpart Sunday, Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry criticized the decision to pull funding from UNRWA, warning against the unjustified scapegoating of the agency's entire staff, which numbers around 30,000 total, with around 12,000 in Gaza.
There we go.
There you go. Okay, now, at this writing, and this was midnight last night, so in the wee hours of yesterday morning, that list was 9. By the time we interviewed Norm last night, it had grown to a little over a dozen. But one country that is continuing to fund UNRWA is Belgium. Based Belgium here. Here's Petra de Sutter. Belgium will continue to fund UNRWA. The agency is irreplaceable in providing urgent and crucial humanitarian relief within Gaza. Belgium will also closely monitor the UN internal investigation and demands that UNRWA provides complete transparency. So they're kind of handling it the way you would if you cared about the implications of defunding. They say we're going to look into the to the accusations, but we're not going to shoot first and ask questions later. We're not going to cut off funding until we know whether or not there is reason to do so. And as we all know, there's not reason to do so. You're talking about allegations of a literal handful of people in an agency of 12 to 13,000 people in Gaza, 30,000 total. How does Israel respond? Like they always do. Belgium is one of the Western countries that has refused to cut funding to UNRWA. So Israel just bombed the office of the Belgian Agency for Development Cooperation in Gaza. This is a direct result of the impunity Washington has provided Israel. Here's Caroline Ganez. I forget what her title is within Belgium. I should have noted it, but I didn't. I apologize about that. But she is a very, very credible source of this. The office building of the Belgian Agency for Development Cooperation in Gaza has been bombed and completely destroyed. Attacking civilian buildings is and remains completely unacceptable. I am convening together with the Israeli ambassador, and I guess she tagged him. So yeah, you talk about a rogue state. Russell mentioned this earlier in the stream. You have a push by Israel to defund UNRWA. Netanyahu goes and says we have to defund it. We, predictably, sure thing, you got it. Dozen other Western states join. Belgium says no, we're going to look into it. But in the meantime, we need to keep this aid flowing. Otherwise, people are going to starve to death. And what happens? Kaboom. Kaboom.
Yeah, Norway better watch out for any infrastructure it has there because they're continuing to fund UNRWA. The European Union apparently has not cut off its funding either. But it is, I mean, between this and the mass grave discovered yesterday, it is just incredible that this clearly criminal, genocidal, psychopathic regime is able to operate with this kind of impunity, and that Western powers, chiefly the United States, is still running around pretending this is anything other than a criminal regime. This Israel's behavior is as bad as any rogue state we have ever labeled as such. Any dictatorship in the third world that we've ever been on the outs with, in spite of the fact that we've also supported many of them, depending on whether they're willing to protect our interests. This is as bad as almost any state you could think of, and worse than most.
Please clap.